Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another Peaceful Solution Character Education Certification class. Everyone can be seated that's standing. And of course, thank all of you for joining us from overseas. And even if you're not overseas, down south and all around the world, we know a lot of people tune into these classes. And once again, we want to make everyone aware tonight that we're going to complete the character unit. So this will be our last class in this. We're going to finish the What I Have Learned section. You can go ahead and be turning over to LP7E, and that's going to take us to the What I Have Learned section we'll go over. But really quickly, I want to let everyone know that the next class coming up, you're going to need a different book. And we will have that book available online for those of you that are overseas or don't have the book, and you'll be able to download it. It is known as the Junior High Acceptance Unit. And a lot of the things we're going to cover tonight, and of course all of the things we've covered so far, if you remember the peaceful solution in building a positive character, we talked about how we lay a foundation and then we build upon that and we shape and we mold it. So everything that we've went through, we're always going to be going back to because they're very foundational. They're what we build upon, and the acceptance unit will build upon this, and then of course the units that follow build upon the units that come before them. But the acceptance unit, once again, if you need one, by all means, you can check out the number that's on the Facebook screen. You can email us, but it will be available for a free download within the next day or two. That way you'll be able to have it, and you'll be able to use it. And once again, you'll want the teacher's manual. If you're going to order one, you'll want to get a teacher's manual because it's very important that you have the lesson plans and the note to the teacher that's going to help guide you as a teacher in teaching this to the students. So looking here on lesson plan LP7E and procedure 8, of course it says conclude the lesson by encouraging students to turn the page to 161 in their handbooks and read the section entitled What I Have Learned. Urge students in making, developing, and maintaining a positive moral character the most important thing in their lives. So that's the most important thing that we can offer them, is to encourage that they need to maintain this. And it says stress that by doing so they will achieve great success now and in the future and will positively affect the lives of many others. And that's one thing that any student, and that's what a teacher can really walk away with, the reward of knowing that these students that come to these classes and that learn these things, as a teacher, the desire for a teacher is always to help improve somebody's life, whether it's teaching them how to read, how to write, how to do arithmetic, or character education. The reward that comes from it is not only seeing that person better their own lives, but also be able to better the lives of many others. So turning over to page 161, and as you see here, this is kind of a what I have learned for the whole book. And there's a lot of page numbers you could put here, but we're going to cover some briefly tonight because we want to make it through all of this. And there's going to be some I'll tell you to put page numbers down beside of, but we'll get to them later as we move through because these foundational parts connect together. So some of them we'll turn to and read immediately. Some of them I'll tell you to write them down. And then as we go through it, we'll connect all of these pieces together so we'll understand what we're building here. But all of these things we've been through, and they should be very familiar to everyone. And starting off in the very first one, here on page 161, on the What I Have Learned section, it says, character is very different from personality. Character is the sum total of my values and experiences which help me to distinguish what is right from wrong. So what I want you to do is, on the section it says total of my values, underline that, and off to the side, put page 6. Draw an arrow because it's very important that we remind ourselves of what values are. And we're going to get to that later on. But we want to concentrate on the difference between character and personality. But once again, we have to remind ourselves what these values are. It's something that we deem to be important, but we're going to get deeper into that. So as you write page 6, down below it's the way I do it, right? Below that word right, or where it says is right from wrong, I start writing page numbers there. And the first page we're going to turn over is to 23. We're going to remind ourselves, and remind our students exactly what personality is. And when you're teaching the class, a lot of these right here, challenge your students. You don't readily give them the page. See if they can go to the page. See if they can connect the dots and what you've learned so far. And you'll find out a lot of children, we call this positive competition, so to speak. They'll race to try to get to the right part. So this can be a very engaging and a very enjoyable time to go through the book. But once again, on page 23, that's when we actually covered what personality really is. And notice it says here, because it is so easy to confuse personality and character, it is important to explore what is meant by personality. And of course, we say here that personality is made up, notice, of behavioral traits that are unique to each individual. So behavioral traits that are unique to each individual. And personality is the process you choose in how you govern your feelings, attitudes, and preferences. So if you don't have that underline that, because as we go through the peaceful solution, we're going to show how, even though thus far we learned that personality is one thing, character is another, but as we go through the peaceful solution, we're going to see how they work hand in hand together. It's really hard to have a negative personality if you have a positive character. It's really hard to do that. It's always hard to have a negative if you have two positives. And we'll get into the acceptance unit very quickly about negative personalities. But notice once again, personality is the process you choose in how you govern your feelings, attitudes, and preferences, and it is the basis on which you choose to interact with others. And then looking to the second paragraph here, it starts out with most people. Notice it says most people choose their friends based upon compatible personalities. In other words, during the course of casual conversation, during the course of casual conversation, two people discover that they both have the same goals. They share likes and will usually motivate them to get to know each other better. Now, that doesn't cover character because two people can get to know each other and realize they both have the same goals of robbing a bank. So that's not positive as far as character. And if we look over to page 25, and you can write that on the What I Have Learned section also, because you'll want to have these page numbers there for your reference, and you can put a lot more to go with that, but we at least want to have these written down. And on page 25, notice we have character versus personality. And once again, it says, it is important to distinguish between an appealing personality and a positive character. Keep in mind that personality is what we notice right away when we meet someone. And that can even be into the kind of clothes they wear, the color of clothes they choose to wear, the shoes they wear. A lot of these things are based on personality. Notice it is how we present ourselves to others. In fact, if we meet someone who appeals to us, after only one conversation, we think to ourselves, oh, he or she seems like a nice person. Character, on the other hand, is what helps you to determine what is right from wrong. Now, if you notice, we said here that personality, it's the process you choose in how to govern your feelings, attitude, and preferences. And we're going to get into that. If you remember, remind your students that every action begins with a thought. And of course, what you think or how you think about something has a lot to do with the attitude you have concerning a matter or the education you have concerning a matter. But back here on page 25 in the second paragraph, once again it says, character on the other hand is what helps you to determine what is right from wrong. Character defines the way you treat yourself and the way you treat others. So even the way we treat ourselves is defined by character, whether we have self-respect or as we also call it self-worth. Notice it dictates your moral and ethical beliefs. And remember, morals are rules. So your character is based on your adherence to the rules. And your personality could be your attitude toward the rules. So once again, we'll tie these things together, but the difference is personality is, possibly you're outgoing, possibly you're shy. Nothing wrong with that. But if you're someone that likes to steal rather than ask permission, that's a character flaw right there. So the difference between character and personality, once again, character is what you base your decisions on according to the rules. And that determines whether you're positive or negative. Personality is a combination of your likes and dislikes. So also, while you're writing those down here on page 161, you can go ahead and write down page 36 and page 38. And that's talking about character and the family and how we learn things. But we're going to get to that as we move down through here. But you'll want to write that there. That way you'll have a connection point. in this what is character is different from personality. So we're going to have to move on to the next one because we have a lot to cover tonight. And the second one here on page 161, it says, when I behave in a manner that demonstrates care and concern for myself and others, I'm displaying my positive moral character. So once again, when I behave, so when we conduct ourselves in a manner that demonstrates care and concern for myself and others, I'm displaying my positive moral character traits. So we'll want to turn over first to page 8. And of course, page 8, you'll know that as the page with a dividing line. And of course, notice here we'll start off in the very top. And it says, regardless of culture, religion, or environment, there are some values that all people share, and they're called moral values. And a moral value is like a line that divides wrong behavior from right behavior. People from all walks of life, young or old, big or small, rich or poor, share some of the same basic concepts of moral values. And then looking down here to the part right below the right or wrong section, you notice it says morality can be divided into 3 basic categories. And once again, you have your behavior, that's your character, and your attitude, that ties into your personality towards all life. And then behavior, that's your character, attitude, personality towards possession and properties, and then behavior and attitude toward the environment. But notice here in the next paragraph, it says moral principles in regard to human life means acknowledging and accepting that all life is valuable and all people have the potential to contribute to society. Now notice, when you have, this is individualized here, when you have a moral attitude toward others, you accept and appreciate that they have the right to live in peace, safety, and security. And here it is. You can demonstrate a moral attitude by being respectful towards all people. And if you don't have it written there, make sure to write down that everyone deserves respect. No one has to earn respect. Respect is deserved by all. And we'll get to that later on as we proceed, but it's really important to understand because that is one of the most confusing things in school systems today is when there's posters hanging on the wall that says respect, you have to give it to get it, or respect is something that has to be earned, because that's not true. Respect is something that should freely be given to all, and that's a demonstration of moral attitude. So continuing on, it says this means not taking advantage of others, but rather showing them care and concern. So showing them care and concern. And then look over to page 44. Write down page 44, and we're going to go there a couple times, but there's certain parts we're going to read for certain sections. Page 44, and once again, we're talking about how we behave in a manner that demonstrates care and concern. And on page 44, in the third paragraph, so in the third paragraph, it starts out with, in these families. Notice, in these families, it says, children communicate their needs to their parents in positive ways. Children also respond to their parents with respect. Now, notice that word respect. Everyone deserves it. And then notice the head title, what is a healthy family? And that's what we're talking about, is what takes place in a healthy family. And we're talking about communication. And everyone deserves respect. And as we proceed throughout the Peaceful Solution, we're going to be shown how communication is the foundation of respect. Without communication, respect is not there between two individuals. You have to have a form of communication, respectful communication. But notice it says, members of the family verbally express their care and concern for each other by saying, notice, I love you, or I appreciate you. Other verbal courtesies such as please and thank you and I apologize are frequently used in everyday interaction. In these families, the use of kind words is valued. And once again, if you don't have it, write page 6. Always remember to remind yourself of what values are, because it can be very confusing when we start using the word value as something different than what it means toward character education, because we're talking about something we deem to be important that brings no harm to ourselves, someone else, or the environment. But continuing on, it says, these parents teach by example that name-calling, teasing, and insults rob others of their self-worth. So once again, we're talking about how our behavior, and this is a healthy family, showing how it's done through communication of saying, thank you, please, just being polite to each other. Now, keep in mind, it doesn't mean that you say I love you as you slam the door along with some other obscenities. This is talking about sincere, respectful interaction between two or more people. So keeping that in mind, write that down, and we're going to move on to the next one. So we're talking about how we can behave in a manner that demonstrates care and concern. Now, the next bullet point on page 161, notice it says, although personality can be mistaken for character, it is different in that personality enables me to be unique. It is a combination of my likes and dislikes, attitudes, and preferences. So we're going to go back to page 23. We were just there and read a small section of it. And you can write page 23 there for your notes. But once again, as we read page 23, notice once again that you want to highlight here where it's talking about although personality can be mistaken for character. This is something that will take time to introduce to a child, to a young adult, even to adults themselves. Because notice once again where it says it's so easy to confuse character and personality, and it's important to explore what is meant by personality. And I'll give you an example of some things that take place in society. I've talked to people before, along with other teachers and students, and talked to a student in the school and asked them, and it's usually you see this trouble going on, and you'll ask somebody, why are you hanging around that person? Well, they're my friend. Well, why are they your friend? Do you like breaking the rules yourself? Do you like getting in trouble? Do you like in-school suspension? Do you like the teachers calling your parents? Do you like those things? No. I get in trouble. Then why is this person your friend? How is this person your friend? And then they'll start naming the things. Well, we're on the football team together. We like to do this. We like the same music. So their personalities kind of they connect. But the character, which is what he's trying to build his friendship on personality connection, the character just leads him making one bad choice after another. This can be the same thing where it's a place of employment. It could also be the same thing in school. And if you can recall back in your days in school, I know my days in school were pretty much whenever you went into class and you seen there was a substitute teacher, that meant the rules were less effective that day. And that's pretty much a common thing. Well, now in schools it seems like the rules are pretty much less effective every day. It seems that way. And I hear that from teachers themselves. But I hear teachers that say that if I had to substitute, I would never teach because you're going to have to deal with a lot of pressure. Well, the reason I bring this up once again, it's so confusing to differentiate between character and personality, is this is something that's going to have to be spoken, respoken, spoken again, speak it some more, and there's going to have to be everyday examples shown to the students on how these things are different, and the difference between attitudes and dislikes. And you'll have, examples that we've seen in school with personality. Sports is not always a great example, but one thing I found, you can ask students, and I fell into this myself when I was a young person growing up in North Carolina. Everybody would ask, and we would go to school, and everybody would, what's your best liked football team? And mine was always the Dallas Cowboys, and I honestly cannot tell you why. I have no idea, and I've grown to not care much for sports in the last 20 years. Haven't watched them play in probably 20 years, but I was a devoted Cowboy fan when I was. And my dad was a Green Bay Packer fan. And all of my friends were Washington Redskin fans. And I have no idea why we were that way. And no one could explain why. We just did it. And we were best friends until the Cowboys and the Redskins played. And then we were arch enemies for one day. And this thing that gets into people's minds, I say that in kind of jest because back then it was kind of it was just a side thing that we kind of laughed at as 13-year-olds and 10-year-olds. But there's things that grow up today that you can see in the nation's capital that are actually personality differences that lead to a lot of character conflicts, because people will define something that they look at as a character choice or a choice of morality that's really based on a decision of personality. So pull examples through daily interactions. What you see today compared to when this book was written is very different than the interactions we see in society. So always pull up for your students some of the things you can use for examples that are taking place in current events, so they can see the difference between the character and personality. And it's not very hard to find where these things are confused. And to give that example, if you turn back to page 161, of course, we use an example here. And we're once again building on this personality and how it can be very hard to understand the difference between the two. And in the acceptance unit, just so you understand, we'll get into a section on choosing friends. And there's actually questions that you'll ask yourself and go through about this friendship, because the one we're going to go through here is about a friendship that on page 161 is the fourth bullet point. It says, even though two people might have similar personalities, they could have very different characters. And if you turn over to page 26, that's where we give an example of this, of Kelly and Pam. And I put it there to remind me of exactly what's being done, because the Peaceful Solution actually gave a great example here of Kelly and Pam on page 26. And this is what I'm talking about, getting current events, examples of these things that take place. And notice it says Kelly and Pam are both in the band, so they like that. Both girls enjoy pizza and chocolate ice cream. Okay, there's some personality traits that connect. They share many other similarities or similar personality traits as well. For example, both like to draw, swim, and watch educational shows. After band practice, they usually stop at the, I'm thinking that's the mini mart. My book is missing the word, on the way home. On that particular day, they both bought drinks and a snack. Kelly received change from the $5 bill she gave the clerk, but Pam received more change than she was supposed to. So now we have a character issue. They both enjoy doing a lot of the same things, but now we have an issue based on morals. You're going to return the money, you're going to steal it. And notice, you can't keep that money, Kelly says in a shocked whisper. The clerk might get in trouble and lose her job. So you've got a lot on the line here. Plus, you will be stealing if you keep it. This isn't stealing, replied Pamela. She gave it to me. It's not my fault she's careless. Now, was it Pam's fault that the person running the register was careless? No, it wasn't her fault. But remember what the author said in the beginning. Two wrongs don't make a right. So if someone does something that was careless, taking advantage of their mistake is not the right thing to do. And you want to turn over to page 70, because this is where we really talk about what's taking place here. And I always connect these two together, and it's called peer power. If you remember about peer pressure, where one person can influence another person into doing something that they might not do had they been around someone who was trying to encourage a positive choice. But notice it says, as you get older, you rely on your friends for more companionship, and notice acceptance. And we're going to get into that on what it means to seek acceptance. It's nice to be around others when others who are fun and share similar interests and personality traits as you. Having friends is great, but friends can influence each other in negative ways. And that's what we've seen with Kelly and Pam. And that's what, notice the bullet point we were covering, that even though two people might have similar personality traits, they could have very different characters. And that was an example right there, but that was through peer pressure. And notice Pam was actually offering positive peer pressure. She was actually trying to get her to make the right choice, but she chose to follow her emotional feelings and things that had probably been put in her mind before from teachers before, that it's not your fault if someone makes a careless mistake. But notice it continues to say, here's the problem. If your friends accentuate that the negative and not the positive traits in their character and encourage you to do the same, they are influencing you in a negative way. This is called negative peer pressure. Negative peer pressure can come in different forms. For instance, your friends has cigarettes to offer you one, and you say no thanks, and he or she says, oh, come on, everybody smokes. Even if he did not directly tell you to smoke, his response can press you into thinking you will be an oddball if you don't. You know, and for the students out there that are listening, I can promise you there's a lot of people in life that's never smoked. You know, there's a lot of people that have, and there's a lot of people that haven't. So don't let anyone ever pressure you into it. But as teachers, we can actually stand up and tell the students, knowing, you know, when we give these examples, that there's a lot of things that people tell you everybody's doing it. They're lying to you. Not everybody's making negative choices. Not everybody has done negative things. We've all done negative things throughout a wide spectrum, but not everybody is doing that one negative thing that people are being put into pressure on. And there's a lot of things in school right now our children are going through that face the same thing. And then once again, always refer them back to page 25 in the character versus personality. And if you turn back to page 25, we want to read that bottom paragraph, because once again, that ties into friendships, and we're talking about accepting the friendships and the influence and the peer pressure that takes place with it. But notice here in the very last paragraph on page 25, it says, take the time to learn about a person's character regardless of their personality. For example, two people might appear to have similar personality traits but have very different character traits, or they might have opposite personalities and have very similar character. True friendship should not be based on compatible personality, but more so on positive character. So notice here where it says beware. In other words, be on guard, be cautious. Not only of the personality, so beware of not only the personality of someone you associate with, but his or her character as well. And notice there it says it's a fine line that we walk. And of course, remember, if your friend influences you in something that gets you in trouble and you go to jail, you know, it's not a fun thing. You're not going to take you there and let you have a party. You know, it's not like you get to go there and enjoy yourself. It's not a pleasurable thing if you do that. Never been to jail as far as to stay, but I've been to jail to teach a lot. And I've never met anyone yet that's enjoying themselves. They all want out, and that's what they're looking for. So quickly turn back over to page 161. Page 161. With that in mind, notice the next bullet point here. It says, it is very important that I evaluate my friends based not only on our similar personality traits, but also on character. And we just read that on page 25. We read that on page 25, but also write down page 60. We'll go ahead and write these page numbers down so you'll have them. Write down page 60, and in parentheses, if you want to, you can write influences, because that's what page 60 will cover. And then, if you remember on page 56 and 57, this is something you want to reference the students back to, because that was a self-evaluation that they took. And it was entitled, What is Important to You? And that self-evaluation that they took was to help them understand what was really important, what are they looking for, what are their goals, and what's influenced them thus far. So remind them of the evaluation they took and see if their opinions have changed. See if their attitudes have changed concerning some of the choices that they said at that time. And then also write down page 80. Because we're telling someone that it's important for them to evaluate their friends based not only their personality traits, but also in character. So we're trying to tell them to set their mind in advance to when they're choosing friends. Don't just set it on automative where you just automatically pick someone because of the personalities, but we want to set our mind in advance on how to choose friends. So now that we have that written down, if you'll turn back over to page 56 and 57 very quickly, you'll see the evaluation that the students would have taken here, and this is before we got to the influences, but this was for them to kind of understand themselves. What have they been influenced to do so far? What are their likes and dislikes thus far in their life from the teaching, the education they had received? And of course, after that, we get them over to page 60, and it was entitled, Influences Are All Around Us. And once again, notice your values. Always when you see the word values, underline it and remember page 6. Always remember page 6, because the values, in fact, let's go ahead and turn over to page 6 right now so we can have that in our mind. Values, once again on page 6, values are what you believe in. So it's what you believe in, whether they're right or wrong. You know, you can believe in valuing things as we get into acceptance unit that you believe are important or necessary, that you find out later on in life was something you could have lived without and you would have been better off without. But we're talking about moral values, and we're building on page 8 when we read this about that dividing line. So values or moral values are what you believe in or feel strongly about. They also play a key role in developing your character. And notice the sum total of everything you value becomes your value system. So we have a value system, and here on page 60, your values, or you could put your value system, play such a key role in developing your character that you must, once again, be aware. There's another time we're told to be cautious. Be aware of how influences affect the things that are important to you. So once again, your values are something you deem to be important. And if we're basing that on moral values, then we're only going to allow ourselves to be influenced to do something in a proper way, a positive way, a moral way, if it's presented that way. If it's negative, we should be able to walk away from it, just from our value system and what we've been educated to do. But once again, it says an influence is something or someone that has the ability to affect your attitude, way of thinking, feeling, and behaving. And if you haven't caught on thus far, an influence has the ability to change your personality and your character. Because your attitude and way of thinking, as well as your feelings and behaving, that's a combination of both your character and personality, and that's what the influences have the ability to do. If you've ever been, like I just gave you an example with, I used to be a huge sports fan, and that's kind of a past tense in my life where someone can talk to me about it today, and I really don't even know what they're talking about. It's been so long since I've seen it, it really doesn't affect me, and not even an interesting conversation anymore. Where years ago, I was very interested in having those conversations. So even my personality has changed from the influences that have been around me and the things that I've chosen to allow into my life. And that's just for my own personal experiences and what I've chosen to do. But continuing on here, in the middle of the paragraph, you're going to see where the word everything, you have you ever been in a hailstorm? Then you'll see the next, go to the fourth sentence, and it starts out with everything you hear. Everything you hear. You know, I would draw a box around the everything, and you can put everything as in education, because education comes into this. Everything you hear, what you allow in your area. There's a lot of negative things that we'll get across to our students that you never really have to hear these things. The author said if he had never heard the words of his father made mention when he was a young person, he would have never been led to do these positive moral things. Could have been a very different story, but you never have to leave yourself in that negative situation. And think about that as we read this. Everything you hear, experience, and see, as well as every interaction and conversation that you're a part of, have the potential to change the way you think and feel about the things you value. So you can be around that peer pressure we talked about earlier, and someone, due to allowing yourself to be around the wrong people at the wrong time, can actually influence your value system in a very negative way, can change your attitude to take on negative traits, can change your personality and character to become a very negative part to not just your life, but other people's lives. So always remember that influence, and of course, setting your mind in advance. We will get to that as we proceed. So you have that written down. We're going to keep moving here on page 161, and we're going to try to finish this tonight. Hopefully we do. And then that way we can tie it in. But make sure you have setting your mind in advance also, because you're watching your thoughts. You're guarding your thoughts. That's what setting your mind in advance is. That's part of that beware, be on guard, be cautious. So continuing along here to the next bullet point on page 161, it says, the foundation for my character began even before I was born. Through a combination of my parents' genes, I inherited specific behavioral patterns. And of course, anytime you hear about the genetic part, you should always turn to page 4. That's really where we started out with character. Everyone has it, but where does it come from? And that's where we really started on when we started this book, building our building point. We really started that point on this page. And we're going to start with the very first paragraph. And it says, our character defines what is important to us and what we believe in and how we treat others just as clearly as our faces and voices define who we are physically. In fact, our character is an integral part of who we are. Whether the character we have is positive or negative depends upon many different factors. So always remember that. It's not one certain thing, it's a combination of many things that determine this. These factors include genetics, family values, influences, experiences, choices, and environment. Together they help to mold and shape our character. Then looking down to the next paragraph, it says, through the study of genetics, science now knows that in addition to traits such as eye, hair, and skin color, individuals also inherit intelligence, musical abilities, and specific behavioral patterns. These behavioral patterns make up what is known as your character and personality. Some traits like skin and eye color depend solely upon the shared genetic information of both of your parents. And this is not just from your parents, but also from your grandparents and from your great-grandparents. These things are shared. These are called fixed traits. And it's talking about your eyes, your skin, things that are pretty much set. They don't determine, and this is something society could really use a lot of education in. Skin color doesn't determine whether you're a positive or negative person. That's taught in the very basics of the peaceful solution. What country you're from doesn't determine whether you're a positive or negative person. The education that you've been offered can determine whether you're a positive or negative person. But notice what we're going to get in there is not a fixed trait. Eye color, skin color, country you're born in, those are all set. You can't change that. But notice, on the other hand, your character and personality develop is not based on your heredity, but also on your environment. So the development of your character and personality has a lot to do with your environment. It says both environment and what you have inherited are powerful tools that shape you into who you are. And then notice here at the apple on the bottom, it says, even before you were born, the combination of your parents' genes began the process of forming your character. And you can write down, if you want to, beside that apple, the parenting unit. When you get into the parenting unit, the introductory to the parenting unit, it's just so you'll have it as a teacher. It lets you know, and it goes through some scientific studies that show that a child starts to learn from within the womb. They can identify the mother's voice. They can identify the father's voice. They can also identify with things being read to them. So these things take place not outside the womb, but they also begin inside the womb. So also with that, with a combination of your parents' genes, write down pages 35 and 36. And pages 35 and 36, that starts off with all in the family. And the all in the family, of course, if you turn over there really quickly, we'll just read the first paragraph. But the whole section really encompasses the genetics, and it's more than just being in the womb, and it's more than just who your parents are. There's a lot of people that can be given birth by a mother, never know the father, and the grandparents raised them. There's many people that may be given into foster care. So they have the genetic traits from their parents, but they could be placed in a very different environment. But the environment you're in can really help to make up who we are. But notice here on page 36 at the very top, it says, have you ever heard someone say you look just like your dad, or you act just like your sister? Genetics account for similarities in both our physical and character traits. For instance, does your mom cry at sad movies? Do you? If you cry at sad movies like your mom, this could be a result of inheriting a compassionate character. In other words, you have the empathy for the character trait in the movie. The word empathy means simply the ability to feel what others feel and to identify with their experiences. But notice it says family members also share personality traits. But unlike character traits, which are sometimes inherited genetically, shared personality traits are often learned behaviors. A learned behavior is something you see in practice. It is developed over time and with certain environments. So that can help distinguish a lot of things. So if you write that down, and this is a section you can spend a lot of time covering with this genetic. If you've ever studied genetics, there's a lot to making decisions. People that there's a situation of a person that I've known and I've talked to at great length that made a really bad choice at a very young age in their life. And after this bad choice, of course, they went to prison for many years, most part of their life. They couldn't understand why they made the choice to do what they did because they said it wasn't me. That was just not the kind of person I was. And later on in life, as this person was in prison, of course, their father passed away, only for them to find out that wasn't their blood father. Their blood father was actually someone that committed the same crime they did and did the very same thing they did. But that person never knew that man. But yet, somehow, that desire to do such a thing went over when he never knew about it at all in his life. But he fell into the same situation that his biological father fell into. Now, does that mean if our parents make bad choices that we're going to make the same bad choices? No. But it means that if we come from a family that makes bad choices, we need to set our minds in advance to educate ourselves on how not to follow that same path. Unless we do that, as we see in society, the path can never be changed if education to change that path is never offered. And remember, we start out with a road less traveled and not getting caught up in these bad scenes. And that's what we're working towards. But remember these genetics and decision making. But that doesn't mean that if you have genetics where two parents made bad decisions that you're going to be a bad child or a bad person yourself. It doesn't mean that. It means you have to educate yourself on how to make different choices. And that's all given into that section, on that. And we're not going to go into that anymore because we have to keep moving along. But spend the time to read through that and also put down page 130. Page 130, and that was a section that covered that not a born leader. Well, none of us are a born leader. In fact, let me just read something there as you're writing that down and turning back over to page 161 so we can continue on. I'll read you just to have this in your mind because we're talking about genetics. And notice it says on page 130, it says, not a born leader, join the crowd. Most people aren't either. But don't let that discourage you from, notice, learning how to lead. And it all depends on learning, education, environment, influences that we spoke about so far. It says there are many things we are born not knowing how to do, such as reading and writing or even riding a bike. But once again, it reminds us that learning these skills might have been difficult at first, but you not only learn how to do them, you learn how to do them well. And it reminds us that leading others requires character, personality, and skills to be the very best. And those are things we have to learn in life. And that's something we have to remind ourselves if we want to be a better person, make better decisions. As teachers that are teaching the character education program to their students, we can't really, Usain Bolt said something one time and I thought was very, the way he said it didn't really interest me, but what he said caught my attention a lot. And Usain Bolt, he's a track runner for the Olympics. He was known as the fastest man in the world. And he was talking about people who go to gyms. And I compared it to character education. And he said people get discouraged when they go to gyms and they work out for 6 months and they don't see the results they want to see. He said, I trained for 4 years to run for less than 1 minute. And they want to see results immediately. Character education is really the same way. Whenever you train in character education, you can train for a lifetime, but you can have decisions that can affect your life. If you make the wrong choice, that can really cost you your life. They can lead you into disease. And I say this because when we're talking about children, it takes a lot of training. We're adults. We still have to be trained. We still have to be guided. But as teachers, this influencing them to make better choices is a never-ending task. And they might still give in and make bad choices. I grew up with people that did. I made bad choices in my life. I'm just thankful that I had teachers who had the compassion and the patience to work with myself. And that's how we actually return that compassion that was showed to us to other people, by doing the same thing to others. But don't expect your students, after they're done with a character unit, to have it, because they literally only have the foundation. And that foundation has to be built upon. So here on page 161, where hopefully everyone is waiting at, we're going to be on the next bullet point, and it says that being in the environment of a healthy family gives me the security, safety, love, and encouragement that I need to develop my positive character. And of course, the healthy family you're going to find on pages 44 and 45, and we just read a little bit off of page 44. But once again, this whole section kind of helps build and helps guide in molding and shaping. But notice we're talking about behavioral patterns and how they kind of pull us in and they help us and guide us, what we've covered so far, and being in that environment. Well, notice here on page 45 it says, and we're talking about healthy families, and it says in these families there's consistency in daily routines. In other words, there's a time for everything, and children know what to expect from day to day. Doesn't mean there won't be some curveballs and pitfalls that come up, but they kind of have an idea what to expect. You can feel safe in knowing that your parents will always make time to go grocery shopping, or they'll provide food, and that you will always have the food to eat. In a home where there is a set routine, there is time for homework, baths, bedtime, and even fun time. Everyone is assigned chores and contributes to how the family functions. So everyone's playing a part. Everyone's got a job to do, and contrary to popular belief, people think that, oh, don't make that child do that work. Well, when they're 30, who's going to come and go, don't make that man do that work? Teach a child to work. Learn to do it at a young age. Don't wait till, I should be able to do what I want to do until I've got to pay my own bills. Well, if you're never trained how to do it, you're not going to know how to do it. But notice here it says this fosters character traits such as responsibility and discipline. And that's what chores and all of these other responsibilities that we put them in the environment, that's what they consist of. That's what we're doing. It's not giving them something to do because we just feel like being the boss and commanding something. It's teaching. It's teaching. And if someone ever tells you, and I know teachers say, these students that come to school, parents don't have them do anything. They play video games from the time they get home to the time they leave. And the teachers see the results of it. There's no discipline in that. There has to be a discipline. There has to be something that's there. But once again, you can put these two pages together, and along with page, 46, and if you'll turn in the very top of the page, this is something that's also very important, because on page 46, this can't be taken for granted in any which way, shape, or form. On the very top of page 46, you'll notice it says another important aspect of a family trained with moral character to resolve all conflicts by finding the peaceful solution. So once again, another important aspect of a family trained with moral character is to resolve all conflicts by finding the peaceful solution that shows respect for all family members. And once again, trained means taught, guide, molded, shaped. It's not something that can be done by not spending the time to do it. Education requires time. And sometimes it doesn't mean that mom and dad are always there. Sometimes they leave you a note. Sometimes it's healthy just to put in a peaceful solution class for your children to watch instead of the latest, greatest movie. You're allowing your child to be influenced one way or the other. Sometimes it's just that. And I know people think that, children don't want to see that stuff all day long. Well, parents don't either. But whenever a situation arises and you see there's a part that needs to be addressed, that's part of the environment that we're talking about, that a healthy family will create that to give security, safety, and love. If you know there's a problem, that doesn't mean you bring the hammer down and start screaming and yelling, but you have to create the environment that brings the solution to the problem. And sometimes it's better off said by someone else. Children don't really tend to want to hear it from their parents sometimes, but when someone else says it, that's a friend or a confidant, for some reason they can say the same words and it means more. And sometimes that's the environment that you as a parent have to be knowledgeable enough to create. So once again, going back here to page 161, because we're really covering some of the same aspects that deal with the same pages, it says, family, environment, experiences, and influences have molded me into the person I am today. So, write down page 4. That's where we talked about genetics. Page 60 is where we talked about influences. You have pages 44, 45, and 46 where we talked about the environment of a family and the molding and shaping of a family. And then something... we'll pick up on that on the next one. So write those pages down for there, and that's talking about the environment, the experiences, and the influences that have molded me into the person I am today. But remember, if you have a child, a student, whether it's a classroom or at home, who is in charge of creating the environment to deal with the problem? Should be the teacher or the parent. Then dealing with the problem, it's better to deal with it in a peaceful way than to meet it head on with full force. Like two rams up in the mountains, just beating their heads together. It's better to create the environment where the solution can be seen. And sometimes it's creating a way for it to come from somebody else's mouth so they can hear it or see it. and they can see it in action. So keep that in mind, because that's a very important part of acceptance. When we get into it, people think acceptance means just accept me the way I am. Well, if we accept people the way they are, that means we need to accept murder, theft. We need to accept riots and burning businesses. We need to accept disease being spread with no caution amongst. We just throw caution into the wind. No, acceptance means you have the right to make a choice, but remember, we're basing everything on not bringing harm to someone else, the environment, or ourselves. And with that in mind, look to the next bullet point, and it says the commitment to develop and maintain a positive character, notice must, and if you don't have that word underline must, underline it, must be done on a daily basis. And it is the first step in preparing myself for the future. So once again, this must be done on a daily basis, and it's the first step in preparing ourselves for the future. And I'll give you some page numbers to write down. If you want to write down page 79, page 79 now, page 79 is entitled, that starts off chapter 4, and that chapter was, now that I have it, how do I keep it? So you can write down pages 79. You'll want to write down page 125 and 147. And you can also write down pages 15 and 16, because they give some examples of positive character traits and the commitment and the consistency that's needed. So with page 79, turn over to page 79, because this really gets to the meat of the subject of what's being said here. And notice it addresses the previous chapter. It says you learn that obtaining a positive character involves what you value. Once again, always circle that word value, because a value system is something that has to be molded, it has to be shaped, and it has to be guided. If you think of a value system as compared to, sometimes we take glasses of water as teachers, and we'll take a clear glass of water, and we'll just take colored dye and drop one drop of blue or red dye into the glass. And we'll talk about how negative things that come into your value system can take what was clear and pure, and it can contaminate it, and it can corrupt it, and it's not so clean. And then you got to work really hard to get it back to what it was. And sometimes it's not possible. So always remember that value system. Never take the value system for granted, because if a person's values change, you'll have a hard time getting them to focus on what is right and proper. But once again, in the previous chapter, you learned that obtaining a positive character involves what you value, who you imitate, and your willingness to practice positive behavior. Now that you know the basic steps in obtaining a positive character, the question is, how do you maintain it? To maintain your character, you must consistently make choices that are respectful and compassionate toward, notice, yourself and others. And if you haven't caught on yet, make sure you understand there's a reason why it says yourself, then others. When we get to the respect unit, we'll learn the very first person we must learn to respect is ourselves. If we don't learn to respect ourselves, we'll never be able to respect someone else. So once again, these are all building points that we're going to use as we keep moving forward. But notice it says maintaining your positive character means protecting and guarding yourself from influences. So protecting and guarding. Think of Fort Knox. Think of a military base. Think of something that you would think has high walls, a fortified fence. Well, that's your value system, and that's what's protecting you from the negative influences. Because once again, protecting and guarding you from influences and choices that could lead you into developing negative character traits, because once again, they have to be developed. Maintaining your character must be done, notice, on a daily basis. Sometimes it must be done minute by minute. So once again, that's one of the pages you wrote down that you can refer back to in a reference. Then on page 125, and it's the second paragraph, I think, on page 125. Yes, page 125 on the second paragraph. Once again, you can read all of this, but this is just to give you highlight points, because we're talking about responsibility. Who's responsible for this? But on page 125, it says, whose responsibility is it to ensure a safe world for you to grow up in? And you can ask your students that, whose responsibility is this? They'll always say, oh, it's the president, it's the governor, it's the mayor, it's my parents. Well, whose responsibility is it? The truth of the matter is, your future is too important to hope that someone else will make a difference. It's up to each and every person to consistently demonstrate character skills, and remember, skills are something we learn, and they help shape and mold us, that will result in peace between individuals, society, and the world. The only way to ensure that your future society will be safe and secure for all people. Notice it's the only way, and that's for each and every person to bear the responsibility. So the only way to do it is for each and every one of us to bear that responsibility so that we can play our part, and everybody has to play a part. And you can't say, well, nobody else is doing their part, therefore I'm not going to do it either. That's like saying everyone else is drinking poison, so I'm going to drink it too. But I expect a great result in the end. It just won't come. And then on page 147, the last paragraph on page 147, it says, so don't drop your guard, not even for a moment. Visualize that your positive character is like a shield, protecting you from the choices that could seriously hinder you from a bright and successful future. So that's each and every person. That's on the individual themselves to do that. And once again, that's the last paragraph on page 147. Now, turning back over to page 161, and I told you to also write down 15 and 16 on that one, and you can read that for yourselves. It's dealing with character traits and positive character traits being used on a consistently, on a consistent basis. So here, the next one, it's developing and maintaining a positive character must be the focus, once again that word must, of all my interaction, activities, and endeavors. So we want to write down page 79 once again, that bearing responsibility for that. And then you want to write down page 74 also, and it's going to be in the second paragraph you're going to find the information, but page 74. And I'll read that to you here shortly. And also page 105. And 105 is going to also connect to the next bullet point also, but it's talking about the decisions, the developing, the maintaining, and the focus, and all these interactions on how they're going to ripple outwardly. But on page 74, I'll read to you the second paragraph. It says, are you beginning to see what is important to pay attention to, let me try again. Are you beginning to see that it is important to pay attention and be steadfast in maintaining your true values, making adjustments to their level of importance in order to focus on developing moral character traits within yourself? We are all bombarded, and that's something that we have to understand. Each and every one of us go through these experiences. I know children look at the older parents, teachers, and think, you have no idea what I'm going through. And and I always tell my children, do you know how I know you're thinking that? Because I used to think the same thing with my parents. I used to look at them and think, there's no way you understand what I'm going through. And for some reason, I didn't realize that they were teenagers until I got to be their age at that time. And now I kind of understand what they were saying. And I understand every day when my dad told me, the older you get, you realize how stupid you were. And that's a saying that has proven to be very true. The stupidity where you think you're so smart, and as you get older, you learn, I wasn't as smart as I thought I was. But once again, we are all bombarded with negative influences every day. That's something that's guaranteed. Every day we all encounter these things. That's part of society we have to work on changing. Some things we have control over, some we don't. It's up to us to make sure we are allowing positive influences in and rejecting and keeping out the negative ones. Do you know the expression, garbage in, garbage out? Well, let's say positive influences in makes moral character come out. So the things, the environment, that shaping and molding, the interactions, the endeavors, the things we allow around ourselves, that will determine what comes from us, comes out of us. And then turning back to the very last one, and keeping all of these in mind, we'll tie them together with this ripple effect. And there's a lot here that we went over tonight. I know it helps to go back and reread it. But I promise you, as we get into the acceptance unit, you're going to see these very foundational things being covered again and again and again. And my personal preference is to bring both books, to bring my character unit and also my acceptance unit. That way I can refer back to, because you're going to see teachers refer back to this unit, pulling things into it for our remembrance. But here, the very last bullet point here, it says, if everyone individually and collectively focuses on developing a positive moral character, the ripple effect would produce a world that had no crime, no hatred, no violence, and no wars. And and ask your students that. Do you really think that's possible? Do you think it's possible to produce a environment or a world that has no crime, no wars, no violence? Do you think that it's something that we could accomplish? Do you think it's something that we could do as a society? Because you're going to find out, as we said before, the hardest thing that you're going to face is convincing people your one individual self in doing the right thing will help change the world. Most people want to see, well, let the world change and then I'll join in. A lot of people want to see the positive things in the world come out and the negative thing goes away, but they don't want to do them themselves. They want to hold on to the negative things, but yet they want to see the positivity in society. But you're going to find that's the greatest challenge, is getting everyone to believe that we can do it. But when you look through society, there's a vast amount of people that do believe it and that are putting forth the effort. So once again, you'll want to write down pages 105, which is the beginning of the ripple effect, 106, 117, and page 120. So very quickly, let's go to page 105. I know we're really close to being out of time, but we at least want to get this part in our mind before we close down. In page 105, the whole chapter covers this ripple effect and what it takes to get it out to society. But notice here in the second paragraph on page 105, it says, in the same way character shapes an individual, it can also shape society, which in turn forms our nation. In essence, character can shape our world. A choice, either positive or negative, starts, notice, with one person, but can affect not only that person, but also a family, society, and even the whole world. And once again, for people that think that, I just don't see where I can make a difference, I always tell you, go back and read what the author said that was mentioned in his hearing as a child, and how he brought together a group of teachers, parents, caring adults that put together this program, and now it reaches into 27 different countries. We have schools all around the world that are teaching these very same things in multiple languages. One person's idea, that was an Okie from Oklahoma during the Dust Bowl. And those words that were mentioned have led to nations learning these very basic things. In the course of page 117, that's the page we call the hope page. That's the page that reminds us that if we're willing to put forth the effort. And then page 120 is the page that talks about positive moral character can affect the world. And it can affect the world, but only if we do our part in putting forth the effort, and never underestimate the influences that you can bring upon individuals that are in this society and in this world. So that's going to conclude the character unit. Once again, for the next class, I would bring it so you can have it for notes and adding to your notes. But the next unit we're going to cover is going to be the junior high acceptance unit. So if you don't have one, once again, you'll be able to download it for free there on our Facebook page. But if you need one, you can always inquire with the phone number located, the information there on the Peaceful Solution Facebook page, and you're more than welcome to get one. If you live here in Abilene, close to the headquarters, you can actually readily get them at our office. They'll have them available for you. But once again, I encourage everyone to get a teacher's manual. That's the most important manual for us as teachers to have. So our next class is going to be this coming Sunday. It will be the 13th, I think it is, the 13th of June. Is that it? Yeah, 13th of June. And Katan will introduce us into the acceptance unit, and we'll begin building from there. Thank you once again for joining us.